I'm here to welcome you on behalf of the Gifford committee to the third in the series of lectures delivered this year by Professor Jean-Luc Marion. Before I introduce this third lecture, could I ask you to switch off your mobile phones and just remind you that we have a final lecture tomorrow afternoon at the same time in this lecture theatre, and then a seminar on Thursday at 5:30 in the Wolfson Medical Building. If you came to the seminar last week, you would know where it is. It's on University Avenue, and the main lecture theatre is the UW's lecture theatre. So I would encourage you to come along if you can. In the first two lectures, Professor Marion spoke about the aporia of the concept of revelation and the attempt at a phenomenal reappropriation of revelation. And I think you'll agree with me that we've been on a genuine journey of discovery, which has brought us at some point to the limits of speculative reason and has considered faith and revelation from the perspective of epistemology and phenomenology. We arrive today at the concept which lies at the heart of Professor Marion's investigation into the question of God and of revelation, the saturated phenomena. He has developed this concept and this line of investigation along a series of works. It's a trilogy now, starting with Reduction and Givenness, Investigations of Husserl, Heidegger and Phenomenology, published in 1988, followed by Being Given, towards a Phenomenology of Givenness, published in 1997, and finally, In Excess, Studies of Saturated Phenomena, published in 2001. And I would also mention the fact that his books on visual studies, on visual representation, which are clearly connected to his talk this afternoon at the Hunterian Gallery on Rembrandt's entombment, have also developed the same notion of saturated phenomena exceeding, in which the intuition exceeds the concept. We'll hear more about this in a moment. More recently, Certitude Négative, Negative Certainties, published in 2010, which hasn't yet been translated or not yet published in English, again has added to this line of thought. Today, he's going to talk about the Christ as saturated phenomenon, the icon of the invisible. Please welcome Professor Jean-Luc Marion.
Thank you very much. What we have to do today is first to come to a provisional but steady definition, formal definition of what revelation may mean, and then to see how far Christology can be rehearsed and reconsidered from the point of view of this concept of revelation. I would like very much you to keep in mind the two quotations which have, I think, repeatedly quoted in the former lecture, quotations by which we could sum up Heidegger and Husserl's determination of what a phenomenon should be. In the case of Heidegger, Sein und Zeit, section 7, the phenomenon is das sich an ihm selbst zeigende, what shows itself from itself, or and as itself. Both translations are possible. And by Husserl, section 24 of Ideas one, the phenomenon should be admitted as it gives itself, it presents itself in intuition, and received, annehmen, as it gives itself. It is this combination of self-manifestation based on self-givenness that makes the phenomenon itself, by itself I mean, that makes the phenomenon develop in its own visibility beyond the limitations or the divide imposed to it by Kant. That is the divide between the phenomenon, what shows itself, and the thing in itself, i.e., what does not show itself as itself, because it cannot give itself in the intuition. I think that phenomenology is assume that what shows itself gives itself, so it is the thing itself which appears. At least it is the reason why we can pay attention to phenomenology as such and not stand only within the limits of reason as they were erected by Kant. My point is that revelation can be defined as a case of this manifestation of the thing itself, and a privileged case. To make this clear, I would like to insist on three formal conditions according to which there is a phenomenological approach to revelation. Those three characteristics can be summed up as, first, the saturated phenomenon, two, the witness, and three, the paradox. First, the saturated phenomenon. The saturated phenomenon, as we know, is defined by the excess within it of intuition over the concept or the signification, and the contrast with the common law phenomenon, or even the poor phenomenon, which, according to metaphysical interpretation of phenomenality, only allow two other relations among the terms, either the deficit of intuition regarding signification, or the equality between them in the case of full evidence. But on the contrary, there is another case where the intuition, far from being exhausted by the concept, submerges the signification that it formalized. It must be seen that in this case, we face what metaphysics used to call the impossible. I mean, by the impossible, what contradicts the concept, or what contradicts itself according to the concept. I think there is no need to remind you that the definition of the possible in Wolff or Leibniz or Suarez is always the same. What is possible is what does not contradict its own concept. In the case of saturated phenomenon, we have an intuition which cannot be framed and kept within the limit of any concept, using or claiming many different concepts or possibly no concept at all. In that case, we are in the field of what contradicts the concept, which is, strictly speaking, the definition of the impossible. And the paradox of the saturated phenomenon is that it is both effective, no one would doubt the reality of the event, for instance, and nevertheless, we have no concept of it, so it is an impossible effectivity. Let us see how far this can be applied to the case of revelation, that is, to the case of Christ. Let us take one example, which is a core example. This is the episode in the New Testament of the Transfiguration. In the case of Transfiguration, the disciples were allowed to glimpse by anticipation the glory of the resurrection, not only did not doubt that Christ's countenance, the Greek is eidos, its eidos, says Luke, for instance, Luke 9:20, verse 29, his countenance, his eidos, became altered, different. And it became altered, Gospel according to Matthew 17:2 says, like the sun. And his garments, according to Matthew 17:3, were like light. Marx adds 9:3, of a whiteness so intense as no fuller on earth could bleach them. So we have here clearly no lack of intuition, and more than that, the difficulty of seeing comes from the excess of this intuition, to the point that the disciples fall on the face, unable to bear the intensity of the vision. And they, quote, it is Matthew 17:6, they are very afraid. Sphroda, says the Greek. They are very afraid. Consequently, the real difficulty in front of this phenomenon, which is typically a saturated phenomenon, arises from what Hölderlin used to call, at least once, the lack of divine names. The lack of divine names, which is exactly the point. There is no name, no concept at our disposal to give any meaning, objective meaning, to the intuition. The lack of divine names, or at least the lack of words appropriate to this effective manifestation of divinity. And when Peter tries to say something, about the three booths that it would be well to set up for Christ and the two figures assumed to be Moses and Elijah, Peter borrows a traditional concept, the only one at his disposal, probably borrowed from the philoxenia of Abraham in Genesis, and because he had knowing nothing what to say. It is the formulation of Mark 9:6 and Luke 9:33. Me eidos o legein, not knowing what to say. This knowing what to say is exactly what I call the lack of divine names, or the lack of the concept facing the intuition. There is an intuition, and they cannot utter a word. There is no concept, no notion to match the intuitive experience. So the adequate signification will not come from those who see the phenomenon, but in the end, from the phenomenon itself, since there is a voice coming from the cloud that delivers at last a signification matching the excess of intuition. That is, a signification itself excessive and literally incomprehensible. So I quote this, what the voice from the cloud says. The voice says, "This is my beloved son, listen to him." So this is the right signification. But this signification is not uttered, find out by the viewer, the spectators, the disciples, but from the outside, from the sky, and from the cloud. And strictly speaking, this signification the question is not whether it was physically actually heard or only intimately. This is not the point. The paradox is not there. The paradox is that this signification just makes no sense. For them, what does that mean? This is my beloved son, listen to him. They cannot understand this meaning. The real concept can be given, and it is so difficult to understand this concept. We are exactly in the case of a saturated phenomenon. Not only there is a lack of the concept from their point of view, but when they get the concept, the right concept from the outside, from somewhere else, they just cannot understand it. This signification is taken up again at the last public manifestation of Christ in the temple just before the Passion, in John 12, 27, 28, and in the same way, misunderstood or squarely refused. There is a voice on the square of the temple coming from the sky and telling, "This is my son, listen to him." And same result. This is the right concept, it cannot be understood. There is a quasi-impossibility of naming Jesus, of giving him a name, his name, and this is a result, at least at the level of phenomenological analysis, of the deficit of the concept at the very moment of the excess of intuition. We can relate to this situation other episodes. Thus, Herod, who wonders in response to the report that all that was done, that all what Jesus has done, indubitable facts indeed, by him, and he asks, who is he? John 9. Who is he? So the facts are clearly known, and they are reported to Herod. And the question is, who? What is the concept, the name? Same thing about the man born blind in John chapter 9. After being healed at the pool of Siloam, he is astonished that the priest of the temple, to whom, in accordance with the law, he had to make his healing known, and who accuse him to support and to be Jesus and to support Christ, is astonished because the doctor of the law, the wise people, the instructed people, do not know how to identify his own healer. He is not surprised that he, born blind, cannot identify his healer, but he is expecting that the specialist, the scholar in the law, would be able to do that. And he answers to them, in all this, what is so astonishing is that you don't know where this man comes from. Huc oidate poten esti. And after the resurrection on the road of Emmaus, the disciples are exactly in the same situation. They are not lacking intuition. They know exactly what happened. They even ask Jesus, you are the only one who is not aware of what was going on in Jerusalem. This is funny because indeed he was aware. But so there is no question about the fact and the reports in public evidence of intuition. But what they miss is to understand the real signification. And they understand, the text says, this is in Luke chapter 24, they understand nothing, anoetoi. And Jesus told to them how anoetoi you are, unable to understand. Anoetoi, nous, it's about the concept. They had the intuition without the concept. And what Jesus did, not to give them further information about the intuitive facts. They got it far enough of it. It was to tell them what was said and foretold in the scripture about those events. That is to give them the meaning according to the prophets and the law. So he gives them the meaning, the concepts. So we understand this all the more. It is all the more important to see this because this episode of the Gospel according to Luke chapter 24 is the only place where the New Testament uses hermeneia, hermeneuein, di-hermeneuein, because the formulation is, and Jesus made the interpretation, di-hermeneusen, made the interpretation of the scripture about everything referred to him. And this means that he had precisely to make the hermeneutics. It is the case where the interpreter is at the same moment the object of the interpretation. He gives the right meaning needed to see the saturated phenomenon as such, which in the intuition is already given but not yet understood. Let us take the example of Mary Magdalene, who certainly sees Jesus after on the morning of Easter, without recognizing him. Why? Because she has no concept, and she imagines that he is another one. She sees without knowing. And when did she, for the first time, recognize him? When she hears for the first time the voice of the resurrected Jesus saying, Mary. At that moment, she recognized the name of the identity of Jesus in her own name. And so the signification comes from outside and given to her, not from the cloud, nor from the sky, but from Jesus himself. We could take the same example in the final chapter of the Gospel according to John 21, chapter 21, when the disciples, having returned to being fisher of fish, when they see again on the shore of the sea Jesus, the Gospel says they did not recognize him. And when did they recognize him for the first time? At the signal of giving them the fish to eat, and after the miraculous fishery. So, again, it's always the formulation coming from outside. This is my son, listen to him, or this is my beloved son in whom I am well pleased, that the saturated phenomenon appears as such. And we could see that from the beginning, that is from, in fact, the Nativity, where the angels said that, through baptism, where a voice comes and gives the right meaning, up to the end, after the miracle, to the story of the resurrection, the concept matching the experience of the saturated phenomenon cannot be produced by the intentional, as an intentional signification by the transcendental eye, but has to come from the outside, and even in that case, remains at first level, at first sight, at first hearing, unintelligible. Because when the father says, "This is my son," only the father knows the meaning of of this word, "This is my son." So we can say that far from being an inconceivable absurdity, this unintelligible, coming from the outside name is the correct concept matching the excess of intuition. But this concept is, as such, a paradox. It is a paradox, and we could perhaps give a strict meaning to this formulation in Luke, Gospel according to Luke 2:34 and 5, that Christ, the text, when Christ is hailed by the prophets of the Old Testament, and he says to Mary, "This man will be a sign of contradiction for many in Israel." And he says, he will be a semeion anti-legomenon, a semeion anti-legomenon. That is, as people used to say, a sign of contradiction. We should say a sign, a logos, which will be listened to and misunderstood as opposing itself, as creating an opposition. This semeion anti-legomenon is, I suggest, to consider it as a right definition of the impossible and nevertheless given concept matching the excess of intuition. We can describe all this as a perfect case, formally speaking, of saturated phenomenon. Now, this being, I hope, granted, the question is, what does that mean to get a concept matching the excess of intuition, coming from the outside, which nevertheless remains unintelligible at first moment, at first level? What does that mean? Is this not just another way to say that there is no concept? Here we have to be very cautious, because as we have seen in the previous lectures, what even in phenomenology is at stake is the transcendental dignity of the I. That is, the I as a producer of significations by an intentionality from the inner point to the outside, to the exterior. Is it possible to conceive another model of subjectivity? Yes, indeed. It is what I call the witness. And we have some case in the New Testament to understand what a witness may be. The witness is the I who knows what he speaks of, but who cannot understand what he says. In front of the saturated phenomenon, the witness stands as an I completely convinced by the excess of intuition. But precisely because he has no doubt about what he has experienced, can perfectly well remain unable to interpret what he has experienced. And this is, in fact, even from a legal point of view, the meaning of a witness. A witness is someone who knows perfectly well, quite certainly and surely, what he says, and to some extent can accept to bear a testimony against his own interest or safety. So the witness is completely convinced and intends to be convincing. He made the experience of this. This does not imply that he knows what has really happened. It may be well the case that he does not understand what he says. He does not really understand what was going on with what he bear testimony of. And in most of the cases, this is the legal and regular and normal situation of the witness. That is, in fact, it is the inspector who will try to interpret the testimony of the witness in order to build up a final explanation of the event. To retransform the apparently saturated phenomenon into a common law phenomenon or an object, this is precisely the goal and the ambition of the detective. The best example of that is Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes tries to downsize the testimony of the witnesses, which spontaneously lead to a saturated phenomenon, into a common law objective phenomenon. And I can even quote Sir Conan Doyle. It is in a story, The Adventure of the Blanched Soldier, where, for once, Sherlock Holmes gives an exact definition of his own method. I quote, "The process," he says, in laying out his method, "starts upon the supposition that when you have eliminated all which is impossible, that whatever remains, however improbable, must be truth. It may well be that several explanations remain, in which case one tries test after test until one or other of them has a convincing amount of support." Clearly, Sherlock Holmes runs up against the difficulties that Hume faced. How to draw a distinction between the impossible and the improbable, how to evaluate conviction, and even how to define the impossible. I would say that a good Christian exegete thus should define himself as the anti-Sherlock Holmes, as the one who knows how to recognize the impossible within the improbable, when at least he sees the signification of this impossible. The witness, by opposition to Sherlock Holmes, bear testimony to the impossible, which means to an excess of intuition without a conceptual explanation. And this is a characteristic of the witness that he does not know. Hoc oida, says the man born blind when he goes to the priest, "I don't know." When they said to him, "Where is he?" he said, "I don't know." Hoc oida, John 9:12. And all the interlocutors which are questioned by the priest, say the same thing. Uk oidamen. We don't know. And this we don't know is precisely the correct position of the witness. So we could, on that basis, for instance, consider the case of the devil, according to John. The devil is the one who knows what he bears testimony to. And I shall come again on that point. The devil knows what he says. And this is the contrary of Jesus, who say repeatedly, I tell what I was told by the Father to tell. But it is not my thoughts, my own thoughts. So there is, even in the case of Christ, a situation of being a witness. There are things which he does not know. For instance, the time of the return, the time of judgment, things like that. Even Jesus is in a position of the witness. So according to this human consciousness at least, we can say that he stays in the position of the witness. To sum it up, let us quote Karl Barth, who says in the first volume of the Kirchliche Dogmatik, why and in what respect does the biblical witness have authority? Because, and in the fact that he claims no authority for himself, that his witnesses amounts to letting that other itself be its own authority. Thus, the man born blind ends up by saying, Lord, I believe. Why? Because Christ, to his question, who is the Son of God, that I may believe in him, has answered him in the first place, I am. Jesus said to him, you have seen him, and he is he who speaks to you. John 9:36. And in the same way, we could even say that, so it is because Jesus has given him he speaks to you, so here I am, that it was possible for the man born blind to get the right confirmation of its being a witness. The other example, and it is very surprising, it is when at the death of God, of Jesus on the cross, the centurion at the foot of the cross recognized that, quote, certainly this man was innocent. Luke 23:48. And what is very strange is that Matthew says that there was they all, the centurion, the other witnesses, they have seen, theorein, or Mark says, idontes, ideo, in Luke. But Luke, in chapter 23, verse 48, says not only that they see eidontes, eidon, but they see the sight. They theorei et theorian. That is to say, the death of Christ on the cross is a theoria. And this is surprising because it is the only case where the New Testament uses theoria. Theoria, what you see, is not a theory, it is not a knowledge accessible to anyone. It is the fact to recognize that this dead man was surely innocent. This is the theoria. So the theoria is not about knowing something, but it's not about knowing, it's about recognizing. It is not a knowledge, it is an acknowledgement. And this acknowledgement, that is to get the right concept matching the intuition you have. In that case, it is very, very difficult to get it because the clear intuition is that he was condemned and died as a criminal. And the right concept is that not only is he innocent, but he is the Son of God. So you have to get the right concept from the outside. And to do that, you need faith indeed. And I come to my third characteristic of this concept of revelation. How faith does operate, in this case, it's by what I suggest to call the paradox or counter experience. The third determination of the manifestation of Christ as a saturated phenomenon is indeed the paradox as counter experience. Let us make a first point. The paradox does not amount to a logical contradiction of a proposition or a mere nonsense or an empirical impossibility or a confusion in phenomenality. This is the logical meaning of the paradox. That is, the paradox is something which has to be reduced to a normal use of logic. The best example is given by Bertrand Russell in On Denoting, where the seemingly paradoxes can be reduced to consistent logical proposition by using the difference of classes. So we all know that there are some cases where the paradox can be dispelled through a logical distinction in order to bring it back into common rationality. Paradox can have another meaning. When it defines that what happened, like the events, only by contradicting the condition of experience, of my experience, and therefore imposing themselves on me as a counter experience. I have quoted and commented on Kant formulation. The condition of possibility of the experience are zugleich, by the same token, the condition of possibility of the object of the experience. And I insisted that Kant is perfectly right if he refers to the objects. That is, the condition of possibility of my experience are the condition of possibility of nature as such, insofar as nature can be reduced to the objects. If it is not the case, precisely when we face saturated phenomena, in that case, the condition of possibility of my experience may be contradicted by the experience, if it is not the experience of an object. Here we face the paradox. The paradox as the counter experience. And I think that Kierkegaard is a very secure guide on this point. I quote the philosophical fragments. It is complete works, volume 4, page 230. This seemed to be a paradox, but one must not think ill of the paradox, for the paradox is the passion of thought, and the thinker without the paradox is like the lover without passion, a mediocre fellow. This, then, is the ultimate paradox of thought, to want to discover something that thought itself cannot think. To want to discover something that thought itself cannot think. Transposed into the term of phenomenality, this warning points out that the paradox offers a logical category that allows for the formulation of saturated phenomena. Those phenomena, indeed, that no signification or concept can constitute as an object. To transpose this in a more theological formulation, let us quote Henri de Lubac, who rightly notes that it is necessary to distinguish between, quote, the paradoxes of expression, one exaggerates in order to be striking, and the real paradox. Those imply a resistant antinomy. Thus, the paradox is not the result of a logical difficulty in describing phenomena, but alone, the paradox, describes logically the particularity of some phenomena. I quote again, paradoxes. The word thus designates, above all, the things themselves, not the way of saying them. The paradoxes is about the some things themselves, and not the way of describing or not describing them. There are situations, phenomena, which are paradoxical, which means they contradict what we use to expect from the object of the experience. Why? Because they don't display objects. And nevertheless, they display a real phenomenon. So, the paradox, understood that way, is not a limitation or a bedazzling of the experience, but extends experience far from excluding it or excluding itself from experience. But the paradox extends experience by allowing us to describe an experience which cannot be objectified, and thus all the more manifest in that it comes from phenomena that manifest themselves in themselves, because they give themselves from themselves. This experience, fitting the phenomena, can be called the counter-experience. From this follows the fact that the logical figure of phenomenality and of experience that contradict the condition of experience, of course, cannot keep us from thinking of a radical description of revelation that Barthes, as a theologian, made widely known. Revelation as the auto-manifestation of God by himself. But the difference between Barthes and the position I try to establish is that in the case of Barthes, this self-manifestation of God, revelation, contradicts the experience to the point that to some extent it is no more an experience. Or if it is an experience, it may lead to the final position, to my opinion, of Barthes, which is that of Bultmann. That is, the real revelation is not the content of a saturated phenomenon, but a phenomenon which not only cannot be objectified, but which has no content, no meaning, which can be described and understood. That is, the revelation is the fact of the revelation, the das, the factum rationis of Kant becoming a factum fidei, that is, the pure Anstoß, the pure impact of revelation of the Word of God on the mind of the believer without any precise content. So the question is whether we are led to this conclusion. I would say that we should, and we can, with the distinction of intuition and signification in the saturated phenomenon, we can find a way out of this aporia. The way out is that revelation actually happens, and at the same moment, because we don't foresee the right concept for the interpretation of what gives itself, nevertheless, revelation can contradict the condition of possibility of our experience. Let us take an example to make the point more precise. It is well known that Heidegger, in many texts, but some among the most famous can be found in the letter on humanism, in Wegmarken 9, page 338 and following. Heidegger used to say that the question of God and of the manifestation of God can be asked in phenomenology and philosophy, but under some preconditions. Those conditions are those. I quote. The existence of God implies first that we know the meaning of Gottheit, divinity. The meaning of divinity imposes that we first understand the meaning of the divine in general. The divine in general can be understood under the condition that we have an access to the safe, that is the divine, heilige, and the safe, the heile, the intact, the safe, the not yet destroyed by nihilism. And to have access to the safe, so to speak, to the heile, we need first to have access to the horizon of being. So we can imagine a manifestation of God as existing, for instance, but under some conditions, and the final condition is to have access to the horizon of being. So there is a possible manifestation of God, but it has to comply to the condition of the manifestation of being. If we read the predication of John the Baptist in Luke, we read that according to Luke, we are first to prepare for the coming of God. So we have to have the path made straight, the valley filled, the hills made low, and everything straight, and so on. We have to prepare the world for the coming of God. But what is the real event, even in the Gospel? And why is John the Baptist not exactly fitting the situation? Is that it will never be possible to make everything straight, the valley filled and the hill low, before the coming of God. The coming of God will always happen, contradicting the condition of the reception of God. It's why all the prophets were killed. And there is no exception, including Jesus. Why this killing? Because the contradiction cannot be overcome. It may be possible that the path will be made straight, the valley filled, and the hill low. But this will come after the revelation, as a result of the coming of God, not before. The contradiction of the condition of possibility of the experience is not only the unavoidable situation of any revelation, it is not only the result of our real situation facing God. It is a definition of revelation. Would revelation not contradict the condition of experience, our condition of experience, it would not be the manifestation of God. How could we imagine that the manifestation of God would not contradict the condition of experience? It would be exactly what we can face, can bear, can buy, can listen to, can understand. It will be equal to us. It would be an idol. So the contradiction of the condition of possibility of experience, to some extent, should be taken as the condition of possibility of our experience of revelation. It is a paradox. It is exactly what I mean. It should be. This contradiction is required if we really think about the meaning of a revelation. And again, I would like to quote Barth. Barth in Kritische Dogmatik, first volume. It does not stand, therefore, about revelation. Revelation does not stand, therefore, under any condition. One can say this only of our knowledge of revelation, but is itself the condition. Above this act, there is nothing other or higher on which it may be based, or from which it might be derived. It is a condition which conditions all things without itself being conditioned. This is what we are saying when we call it revelation. Thus, in theology, I comment, in theology the question does not consist in knowing if revelation contradicts the contradiction of finite experience. This contradiction characterizes revelation analytically, by definition, and I would say a priori. The question is in conceiving how it contradicts them, how revelation nevertheless succeeds perfectly and definitely in its own manifestation. This may be what is usually called dialectical theology, but there is in fact here no dialectic involved. It is a phenomenological situation. If revelation would revelation mean something? It would mean the self-manifestation of God by itself, by giving itself. In that case, this manifestation has to contradict the condition of our finite experience. And this contradiction can be described as a contradiction in the mode of manifestation. We are lucky enough to have a possible definition of a phenomenon which apart from any religious revelation, contradict in our daily life experience the condition of objectivation. It is saturated phenomenon. On that basis, we can imagine that there may be, well, another possible contradiction of the objective experience understood from the point of view of saturated phenomenon, which is the revelation itself. Now, what we have to do now is to see how far we could develop in further details the definition of revelation as an exceptional case of the saturated phenomenon. In this lecture and the following lecture, I shall try to explain the biblical terms within which we can explain this paradox. Those terms, there are three of them. The first is the concept of Mysterion. The second is the rule of discovery, and the third is the concept of the icon of the invisible. So let us just give a sketch of those three concepts to prepare for the next lecture. The first concept is the concept of Mysterion. I shall have no time to give a full exposure of this concept. Mysterion, which should be translated by sacramentum, is in Paul, and mostly in the opening chapters of the first epistle to the Corinthians, then the first chapter of Colossians, and first chapter of Ephesians. The Mysterion is the background from the depth of which the discovery, the revelation, can be operated in Christ. This Mysterion is the condition, the real condition of possibility of a discovery. It is what I call the unseen, l'invu. The unseen is not the invisible. The unseen is what was not yet visible. But we always experience the visibility of the unseen. Let us refer to painting, for instance. What does a great painter do? He is not reproducing anything yet visible. He is producing into visibility something which previously has remained unseen. No one has ever seen the face of Abraham or Sarah as painted by Rembrandt before Rembrandt. No one has ever seen the sea and the sky confusing themselves as it was made visible by Turner. No one has ever seen the mountain Sainte-Victoire before painted by Cézanne. So, the achievement of painting is to make visible, seen, what has remained, I would say, from the origin of the word, unseen. So the unseen is required to have a manifestation. And when we, for instance, in the intersubjective relations, we decided to commit ourselves to another person, we make this union visible. So there was an unseen, and we make this being publicly seen. This is the role of the unseen. The unseen is everything which could be made visible under some conditions. So there is an unseen for the phenomenon of revelation, which can be traced back into the text of the New Testament, for instance, following and checking the use of Mysterion. Mysterion tuteu, the mystery which is hidden. This is the first concept. The second concept is the principle of discovery. I would like to anticipate on on the next lecture by quoting, and you may have a look on those texts, by quoting the surprising formulation given 3 times in the Gospels, in the Synoptic Gospels. We have 3 times roughly the same formulation. I quote first Matthew 10:26. For nothing is veiled, kekalumenon, that will not be uncovered, o huc apocalypsetai, vulgata revelavitur. Nothing hidden, krypton, that will not become known, o ou gnostesetesai. In Mark, Gospel according to Mark 4:22, for there is nothing hidden, krypton, except to be made manifest, ean me ina phanerotete, nor is anything secret, apokrypton, except to come to light, lt es phaneron. And finally, Luke 8:17, for nothing is hidden, krypton, that shall not be made manifest, phaneron, nor anything secret, apokrypton, that shall not be known and come to light, as phaneron lt. Those 3 texts are very surprising. So it is a rare case where we have 3, not fact, but abstract sentences, literally common in the 3 synoptics. And their meaning is quite surprising, because it is said that nothing sealed will remain unknown and sealed. Everything will be manifested. That is, the Mysterion will be manifested. And let us add some additional remarks. It is well known that the Synoptic Gospels are supposed written earlier and so on, because they are not conceptual or less conceptual than John and Paul and things like that. In that case, we have a very conceptual formulation, 3 times. Very conceptual. Because would those sentences be in a philosophical treatise? It would be in sentences of pure phenomenology. It's exactly what Husserl used to say. Everything can become a phenomenon, without exception, without remaining, everything can be a phenomenon, can become a phenomenon, and has to appear as a phenomenon. So we have here not only a strong point made by the three Gospels, but a point which has no other meaning than a phenomenological, widely understood meaning. So we shall try to make sense out of that. And the third thing is that how could everything be made manifest? One of the most surprising and, how to say that, challenging for a philosopher formulations in the New Testament is this verse from the Epistle to the Colossians 1:10, where Christ is said to be the eikon tou theou aoratu. As it is translated wrongly, the image of the invisible God. It is a wrong translation, because eikon is neither eidos, nor mimema, nor algama, or and so on. It is not an image. The image being based on the relation of similarity. The image has to look as the original, so there is similarity. Indeed, there is no similarity possible in the case of the invisible God. It's why no image of God should be made, and no one has ever seen God. So, would Christ be the image of the invisible God? It would be either an idol or it would be an idol. So, indeed, Christ is not the image, it is the eikon. So the question is, how is it possible to have the icon of the invisible? That is, the visibility of God as such, that is, as remaining invisible. This is, from a philosophical point of view, conceptual point of view, very puzzling. What is the meaning of seeing the invisible as such? So those are the 3 points we shall try next time to understand. But please, if you have some time to spend, have a look on those texts. I thank you for your attention.
I'd like to thank Professor Marion for this very thought-provoking lecture on the notion of the icon on the Christ. There's the icon of the invisible. Are there any questions?
Thank you once again, Professor Marion, for an excellent lecture. The question that I have is, I'm interested to hear a little bit more about your theory of the relationship between the phenomenal event in Revelation, between the phenomenal event and the subjective experience of faith. And there's some incidents in Scripture that make it a little confusing. I mean, one is, so St. Paul in Corinthians refers to a miraculous phenomenal event of the resurrection as the basis of faith. But then there are other times in the Gospels where there are miraculous events described, and the possibility seems open of not having faith, right? Because there are those that reject it and attribute it to other things, diabolic forces and things like that. And then a third type of incident is what happens with Peter in Matthew 16, right? There seems to be no phenomenal event that anybody else can see, but yet Peter seems to have an internal inspiration where he says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." So I guess if I were to formulate the question would be, are the phenomenal events with which revelation is associated, are the phenomenal events the foundation of the subjective experience of faith, or are they the object of the subjective experience of faith?
Thank you for your question. We shall precisely discuss this text of the Confession of Peter, because it is a case, the three use of the principle, nothing is hidden which will not be made visible. Those three texts at the end refer to the Confession of Peter. So it is the key example. So we shall see that in further details tomorrow. But what I would say is we have to try to understand why is it possible to see, to get the informations, to see a miracle, to get informations about the teaching of Christ and things like that, and not to believe that is to give no assent. We take this discrepancy, I think, for granted as something intelligible, but it is very strange. It is very strange because in daily life, the more we get informations, the more we are inclined to agree, and that's rational. So why is there cases where we cannot follow the usual path? And this has to be, so the question of incredibility, unbelief, is very strange because we are inclined to believe rather too much. We believe too often, too quickly, too much in the rest of the life. So why in that case? I think that the answer is we can perhaps find out an answer to this point, that we are facing in that case special phenomena, in my language, saturated phenomena, where precisely we can have an excess of facticity, factual evidences, without, in proportion, the matching understanding. In that case, well, let us see, we are very well able to quickly assent to a phenomenon with a very narrow intuitive confirmation, provided we understand well what is going on. So when we can understand, when we are convinced that it is again and again something we have already experienced and we know, in that case, even if we have no factual confirmation, intuitive confirmation enough, we may agree. But it is not true for the reverse case. So this is the point. The more we get intuition, the more the concept matching the intuition may be difficult to find, the more we shall be reluctant to admit the fact. That's the point. And I think that it is too easy to give a moral, religious, theological explanation of this denial of revelation. There is an epistemological problem, which should be, we have good reason to be reluctant. We have to identify that. So what I try to do from now on is more difficult than the two first lectures, because I try to find in the New Testament, and I stick to the New Testament, some loci, some places where the phenomenological analysis can make sense. So I have to not over-interpret, but to select some situation and to understand them in a more philosophical way.
Could I perhaps benefit from the prerogative of the person chairing this to ask you a question about the risk perhaps that you may be running to move outside phenomenology itself, in that you're clearly advancing further than Heidegger when you're discussing the preconditions and the fact that the experience that one has with the saturated phenomena contradicts those preconditions. You're moving even further than that, but at some point you might perhaps need to consider that without a transcendental eye, without any notion of self-evidence of truth, intentionally constituted, and without the basics of, let's not just say Husserl's phenomenology, but even Heidegger's phenomenology, ontology of being, are we not completely leaving phenomenology behind? And perhaps your new concept of saturated phenomena is clearly leading towards a new methodology. I don't know whether it's a soteriology or it's still a scientific method of inquiry, if it needs to be that or only that, but I'm very excited by the perspectives, the horizons that this opens, and I'm just wondering whether you will consider leaving this behind at some point.
Thank you. Well, this is an ever a question which is repeatedly asked. Are you within phenomenology or outside of phenomenology, and so on? I'm interested in phenomenology for two reasons. First, because phenomenology is a non-ending tradition. So we don't know yet how far it will expand. So as soon as it is working, it is a work in progress, I stay here because something is going on. So I hope that I'm still in phenomenology because phenomenology is developing. And in that sense, I would say, for instance, I use with the concept of the non-transcendental I as witness. In fact, I borrow partly this from Levinas. When Levinas says that the I is the result of the election, that is the primordial role of the I is kept, but it is not a self-given role. It is because of the election. It is the case of the witness, which is indeed the center of the experience, but a center which is not self-established. The other case, for instance, the anamorphosis and the reversal of the intentionality. Intentionality coming not from me out there, but from the outside upon me. This is the counter-intentionality, which is already at least foreseen by Levinas. So the same thing for the question of the fact that we can have a lack of that presence is not always that there is a gap between presence and the concept. This is from Derrida. So there is a lot of things which are in the theoretical tradition which I try to use. So I hope that this the second thing is that I take very seriously what Heidegger used to say at least once. I pay no attention to what phenomenology says, but to the thing about which phenomenology thinks. That is, after all, the real question is, what do you make intelligible? If you can make something intelligible, don't worry too much to label this phenomenology, post-phenomenology, analytical philosophy, and so on. We just don't care whether it is pragmatic, hermeneutics, and so on. If you can make something which was not intelligible more intelligible, please keep going. and let other people discuss where you are, what you are doing. Just do. And what I try to do is just to do. That is to say, I'm impressed I started to be impressed many years ago by the fact that the Bible in general, the New Testament in particular, is just about manifestations. And it is about displaying something which has to be known by everyone. And so it is a question of manifestation. And my claim is that traditional theology has paid attention to the New Testament more during a certain period as a confirmation of metaphysical systems, metaphysical statements, without directly taking seriously the obvious phenomenality of revelation. And revelation itself is a term, a verb, a word, which refers to phenomenality. I don't say to phenomenology, but at least to phenomenality. So that's my main concern.
Thank you. There's time for just one more question. Yes, Alexander.
Professor Marion, I've been wondering while you've been speaking about the extent to which one can read a philosophical anthropology, or maybe it's a religious anthropology, into or out of what you're saying, what one can learn about human beings by a consideration of the revelation. And if I could, a lot of questions in my mind about this, but if I could narrow it down to a single thing, it concerns the role of the will in the reception, as to whether the will really has got a role here, or whether a person faced with a revelation is just overwhelmed by it, or does actually have a real and existential choice as to whether to say yes or to say no in the face of it.
We have during the first lecture, I think it was the second, I referred to that problem about commenting on Augustine's doctrine of the revelation as attraction. Whether when we face revelation and the difficult situation of the witness, which does not understand something he cannot doubt, after all, this is the position of witness, the question is whether I can will. Either I will and I decide not to accept something which I cannot doubt, but nevertheless I cannot understand, that is skepticism, or the reverse. I decide by willing that although I don't understand, I accept the fact, which cannot be denied. In that case, say, it is fideism. So that is the usual situation. Again, I would try to answer by reframing the question itself. What is the role of will and the definition of will when we face saturated phenomena? Is it the same situation and the same use of will than when we face common law or phenomena pure in intuition? I think it is not the same case. That is, when I face a phenomenon where I can understand, even if I have not all the intuitive confirmation. In that case, it is rational that my will may offset the lack of certitude. Because I understand, I think that according to the law of probability, it is another case of something which happened in the past, so I can trust that it will go with the same result. So in that case, will can be powerful enough. In the case of a saturated phenomenon, as there is no regularity, no repetition, I cannot do the same thing. So what are the reasons why I may agree, although I don't understand yet everything? So here we have the answer given by Augustine, by William of Century, and others. The idea that we need, in that case, a stronger use of will, and not a purely, I would say, applied to theory use of will. And this stronger use of will is what they call vehementer velle, that is, to love. That is, love is the right use of will when you face a saturated phenomenon. In that tradition, what is the De Trinitate of Augustine and William of Saint-Thierry? What does it mean to love? It is just to will, but vehementer, with a greater force in commitment. So at that moment, love gets a theoretical meaning, an epistemological role, much more important. So I would say there is a third situation, believing with will or denying with will, or using will or not using will. It is a case of love, where you are both more active than ever, because this time you will really will throughout and without any reservation. So, and it is not free will, because when you will, when you love, you have not decided to love. You are attracted. So perhaps the question whether we are free or not, this way to ask the question remains too abstract. There are cases where we are both attracted and perfectly free. There is no contradiction there. When we are addicted, are we free? Or are we or not? It is not that simple, depending to what you are addicted. So it is very important not to have an abstract way to ask the question.
Thank you very much. I'm sure there will be many other questions, and please do come back tomorrow at 6 o'clock for the final lecture. Some of the questions that are kept in reserve, I'm sure, will be answered tomorrow. That's my experience so far. And on Thursday, the seminar at 5:30 in the Wilson Medical Building, University Lecture Theatre. I'll be waiting for you there. Please note down your questions. As we said, they can be passed on to Jean-Luc Marion, head of the seminar. And thank you very much for coming, and Professor Marion for giving.